From the heights of hypocrisy to the depths of derangement, here are today's top lines. Is that Bill Shakespeare over there?
Turning to Secretary of State John Kerry.
Secretary of State John Kerry begins a second day today of talks with the Russians.
Secretary of State John Kerry and Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov were center stage in Geneva.
You want me to take your word for it?
But Putin stole the show with his extraordinary brazen attack on President Obama's Syria speech on, of all places, the op-ed page of the New York Times.
Our source was the New York Times.
Taunting the president for saying America was exceptional.
Well, I thought it was an amazingly well-written.
He said Obama's proposed airstrikes against Syria will result in more innocent victims and escalation.
Very well-written letter.
I gotta tell you, he's a pretty good writer.
I can't see real good. Is that Bill Shakespeare over there?
It's the height of hypocrisy.
I almost wanted to vomit.
It sickened me.
Vladimir Putin actually came up with a good idea.
Vladimir Putin has looked like a statesman.
Putin is the one who's looking like a man here.
This guy looks like the Nobel Peace Prize winner. Such pathetic weakness and wimpiness. Our president looks like the mad killer.
He's making him look like he's the professor and the president is a school child.
You're listening to Putin instead of your own president.
There's a reason Putin decided to put an op-ed in the New York Times.
You can broadcast this show from Moscow, Sean. How about that?
He knows that America is on a feeding frenzy against itself.
I'll be glad to, comrade. Thank you. You're the socialist, not me.
He would love to join in on the game.
That is so embarrassing. The Russians outmaneuvered the Obama administration with the help of one little pawn. So the bishop takes out the king. Somehow that happened. It's like we're playing checkers and Putin is playing shirtless chess on a horse. You know that.
Unbelievable. Let's get to our panel right now. Joining us now is Steve Clemens, Washington editor-at-large for The Atlantic, and Michael Crowley, senior correspondent for Time magazine. And Michael, I want to start with you, because did you ever think you'd live to see the day where the far right in the United States would swoon like this over the Russian president?
It's a little surreal, Jonathan, I have to say, but, you know, to some degree, I think it's any weapon at hand. Yeah, you know, the enemy of your enemy is your friend. So you know, conservatives love the fact that Putin is needling Obama, and I think for some of them, at least, they're being pretty supercilious about this, and you know, willing to kind of willing to sort of in some way side with someone who they fundamentally deplore, and there's something a little bit dishonest about it. I also just don't think it's that big a deal. The guy wrote an op-ed in the New York Times. I mean, he's cynical. It was obnoxious. It wasn't like some great humiliation for President Obama. But again, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and I guess that's how a lot of conservatives see it right now.
Huh, cynical, obnoxious, two very good words to use for some of those critics of the president. Now, Steve, if you were advising the president right now, what would you tell him to do about Syria and Putin? What would you tell him?
Well, first thing, I'd probably tell him to hire the guy who wrote Putin's op-ed, because the clarity of the Putin op-ed compared to the messaging we've had out of the administration over the last 10, 12 days is really big gap. I think the other part of it is let Vladimir Putin strut his stuff. Let him get more and more on the hook for delivering Syria. Let him be, he's gone in 2 weeks from being the most villainized guy, world leader out there on everything from gay issues to whatnot, to being the hero that saved the day. And if you go out and poll Putin around the world, he's very popular right now. So he's on the hook for delivering on his proposal to Syria and delivering on getting rid of those chemical weapons. So I think the White House, can laugh all the way to success on this and give him some credit, even though I think President Obama probably was the original source for this concept.
Right. Michael, help us understand what's going on, if you can, in Vladimir Putin's head. This week, you write that he clearly feels Obama has, at a minimum, tried to undermine him within Russia. His Times op-ed may have been a small way of returning the favor. Michael, what did you mean by that?
Yeah. Look, what I wrote was not really an effort to defend Putin, but to help people understand how he sees us. And he sees America going around the world and aggressively changing regimes, in some cases through military force, like, for instance, in Iraq or in Libya. He thinks that our goal in Iran, or at least he says, is not just about to stop the nuclear program, but to change the regime. He thinks he wants to change the regime in Syria. He's also seen us doing what he says, meddling closer to his borders in places like Georgia and Ukraine. And I think maybe most importantly, Americans have to remember there were major street demonstrations against Putin in late 2011, early 2012. He said Hillary Clinton had fomented it. The U.S. ambassador to Russia was a revolutionary agitator, kicked USAID out of the country, said we were giving millions of dollars to these democracy activists. Some of it I think is posturing. Dictators like to blame foreign enemies, but you know, talking to people who understand the guy, who are Russia experts, they say there's really an element here where he thinks America wants to go around the world changing regimes, and that he's on our list, and not that we're going to go in and bomb him, but that we might be subverting him through the political process. I think that drives him absolutely crazy.
Wow, great.